What we heard today was deeply alarming, not simply reckless, but revealing. It was the sound of a cornered leader, fully aware that the war he launched is slipping beyond his control, desperately resorting to nuclear rhetoric as his conventional forces continue to absorb catastrophic losses in Ukraine. Picture the scene. Vladimir Putin, seated among his senior generals and defense officials, delivering what Russian state media dutifully described as a triumphant assessment of the war. He spoke of success. He spoke of momentum. He boasted of the so-called liberation of 300 settlements during 2025. He showcased Russia's latest strategic weapons, the Oreshnik hypersonic missile, the Burevestnik cruise missile, and the Poseidon underwater nuclear system. It was intended to project confidence, strength, inevitability, but what mattered far more was what he chose not to say. There was no mention that those 300 settlements were taken at a cost exceeding 400,000 Russian casualties in this year alone. No acknowledgement that Russia's Black Sea fleet now largely remains confined to port, deterred by Ukrainian drone strikes. No reference to the fact that Ukraine continues to occupy Russian territory in Kursk nearly 18 months after its shock incursion. These are not minor omissions. They are central to understanding the reality of the war. Instead, Putin devoted his speech to threatening the West, parading nuclear capabilities, and making sweeping claims about weapon systems that sound more like cinematic spectacle than battlefield reality. This was not the language of a leader in control. It was the rhetoric of a man watching his army bleed on the front lines, grasping for a different form of leverage. If victory cannot be secured on the battlefield, then fear must do the work instead. Before examining the psychology behind this nuclear posturing, it is worth pausing to understand why this moment matters. Putin's strategy is built on intimidation. He wants Western publics unsettled. He wants decision makers in Washington, London, Berlin, and Paris to hesitate. He wants support for Ukraine to feel risky, dangerous, unsustainable. The antidote to fear, however, is information, clear facts, hard numbers, and that is where this analysis begins. At today's Defense Ministry board meeting, Putin declared that 2025 marked a decisive phase in achieving the objectives of Russia's so-called special military operation. According to his assessment, Russian forces now hold what he described as the strategic initiative across the entire front line. In military terms, that phrase is meant to signal dominance, momentum, control. But does it reflect reality? Putin claimed Russian forces had liberated more than 300 settlements this year, including what he called major cities converted into fortified Ukrainian strongholds. He asserted that Russian troops were successfully destroying elite Ukrainian units, including those trained and equipped by Western countries. It was delivered as a narrative of steady progress, relentless advance, and imminent success. Yet the speech took a revealing turn. Having laid out his claims of battlefield achievement, Putin pivoted quickly to nuclear weapons. He announced that the Oreshnik medium-range hypersonic missile system would be placed on combat duty by the end of the year. He highlighted tests of the Burevestnik strategic cruise missile, which he claims possesses unlimited range due to its nuclear propulsion. He emphasized the Poseidon underwater vehicle, another nuclear-powered, nuclear-capable system. According to Putin, these weapons will remain unique for years to come and will guarantee Russia's strategic parity, security, and global standing for decades. The question practically asks itself, why devote so much attention to nuclear systems during a meeting ostensibly focused on assessing military operations in Ukraine? The answer is straightforward, because the conventional war is not delivering the outcome the Kremlin needs. Putin avoided discussing the costs behind his territorial gains. Yes, Russian forces have advanced in certain areas, but those advances have come at extraordinary human expense. Russian Defense Minister Andrei Belousov claimed Ukraine has lost nearly 500,000 personnel and over 100,000 pieces of equipment in 2025 alone. Even if one accepts those figures at face value, which independent observers do not, the implied cost to Russia is staggering. Independent estimates from Western intelligence agencies and military analysts place Russian casualties this year at more than 400,000 killed and wounded. That is not conjecture. It is the product of multiple converging assessments, and it exposes the reality behind Putin's rhetoric. Capturing hundreds of largely devastated settlements, many little more than ruins, at the cost of hundreds of thousands of lives, is not strategic success. It is attrition on a scale more commonly associated with the trenches of the First World War. This is not victory, it is a grinding meat grinder playing out in the 21st century. There is another fact conspicuously absent from Putin's assessment, and it is perhaps the most humiliating of all. Ukraine continues to occupy Russian territory in Kursk Oblast. More than a year has passed since Ukrainian forces launched their surprise cross-border operation in August 2024, and despite repeated deadlines issued from the Kremlin, they have not been fully pushed back. Russian forces, reinforced by North Korean troops, have managed to reclaim roughly half of the territory initially seized, but Ukrainian units remain entrenched on Russian soil. That reality alone undercuts the narrative of control and momentum Putin sought to project. A leader who claims to be winning a war of expansion yet cannot secure his own borders is not projecting strength. He is exposing vulnerability. This is precisely the context in which today's nuclear rhetoric must be understood. When conventional warfare fails to deliver decisive results, leaders reach for psychological weapons instead. Putin's speech was not primarily aimed at his domestic audience. It was carefully calibrated for Western capitals. The message was unmistakable. Russia possesses terrifying nuclear capabilities, and it is prepared to place them on combat duty. Support Ukraine at your peril. To understand why this threat is being amplified now, it is worth examining the systems Putin highlighted. First, the Oreshnik hypersonic missile. This is a medium-range ballistic missile that Russia first used in combat in November 2024, striking the Ukrainian city of Dnipro. It marked the first recorded use of an intermediate-range ballistic missile in active warfare. Putin announced that the system would be fully operational by the end of December 2025. Western intelligence estimates place its range at up to 3,400 kilometers, with the capacity to carry nuclear warheads. Designed to evade missile defense systems, it could theoretically strike targets across Europe. On paper, it is deeply concerning. Then there is the Burevestnik, a nuclear-powered cruise missile Putin has championed since 2018. He claims it has virtually unlimited range. At a ceremony in November 2025, Putin boasted that it had surpassed all known missile systems in terms of flight endurance. Russia's top general claimed the missile covered more than 8,700 kilometers during a 15-hour test flight. The concept is unsettling. A missile capable of remaining airborne indefinitely, circling the globe, altering course, and striking from unexpected directions. Finally, the Poseidon system, an unmanned, nuclear-powered underwater vehicle designed to target naval bases, ports, and coastal cities. NATO assessments suggest a range exceeding 6,000 kilometers. It is intended as a doomsday weapon designed to bypass traditional missile defenses entirely. Taken together, these systems are presented as evidence of Russian technological supremacy. But presentation is not the same as operational reality. The truth is that these weapons function far better as propaganda tools than as practical instruments of war. Hypersonic missiles are real, but they are extraordinarily expensive and extremely difficult to manufacture at scale. If they were genuinely decisive, Russia would be using them regularly. Instead, we have seen exactly one confirmed combat use in more than a year. That suggests demonstration, not deployment. The Burevestnik presents even deeper problems. Nuclear-powered cruise missiles are engineering nightmares. Experts have long warned that if such a system were intercepted or malfunctioned in flight, radioactive material from its reactor could be dispersed across vast areas, potentially over Russian territory itself. This is not a precision weapon, it is a liability, a flying environmental catastrophe waiting to happen. As for Poseidon, NATO intelligence suggests it may not be operational until around 2030. In other words, Putin is threatening the West with a weapon that does not yet exist in any meaningful, deployable form. This pattern is not new. Putin announces a revolutionary weapon. State media amplifies it. Western analysts raise alarms. And then quietly, nothing follows. Production stalls, deployment is delayed, capabilities fall short of the hype. The objective is not battlefield use, it is fear, and fear at this stage of the war is the Kremlin's remaining leverage. Over the past year, Ukraine, backed by Western support, has limited Russian territorial gains despite immense pressure. Ukrainian forces continue to strike Russian infrastructure deep inside the country. Russian naval assets have been systematically degraded. Moscow's economy is under strain from prolonged mobilization. Strategic allies have faltered. Even high-ranking figures have been targeted within Russia itself. Meanwhile, Russia has paid an extraordinary price in manpower, hundreds of thousands of casualties, minimal strategic progress, no decisive breakthrough. Putin is not winning this war militarily. He is not winning economically, and he is not winning strategically. What remains is nuclear blackmail. The aim is not to use these weapons. Putin understands that doing so would invite catastrophic retaliation and international isolation. The aim is to threaten their use loudly and repeatedly in the hope that Western democracies flinch first, that leaders grow cautious, that public pressure mounts, that Ukraine is pushed toward a ceasefire on terms favorable to Moscow. This is not military strategy. It is psychological warfare, and it tells us something crucial about the state of the conflict. When nuclear threats become central to the narrative, it is not a sign of strength. It is a signal of exhaustion. Independent estimates from Western intelligence agencies and military analysts place Russian casualties this year at more than 400,000 killed and wounded. That is not conjecture. It is the product of multiple converging assessments, and it exposes the reality behind Putin's rhetoric. Capturing hundreds of largely devastated settlements, many little more than ruins at the cost of hundreds of thousands of lives, is not strategic success. It is attrition on a scale more commonly associated with the trenches of the First World War. This is not victory. It is a grinding meat grinder playing out in the 21st century.